just had to do it.
Hello, everyone. This is Lee Andrews, and this is another Live with Lee, and I am so excited about today's entire lineup, starting with this live broadcast, talking about the evolution of someone's career from restaurant server to his first user experience role. And unlike most of these types of broadcasts, you're going to see all three components of what happened for this to happen. So we've got Gregory's recruiter, Chrissy Andrews from Vitamin T, and we've got Dennis Covington, the hiring manager from the Container Store, who saw something in Gregory to transform his life. But before Gregory came in contact with Chrissy and Dennis, he had to do some work. And so we're going to talk about today what I really want our audience to walk away with today is a little bit of hope and realizing that you can't do anything on your own, that it really does take a community. How do you build that community is really all about Gregory's story. Amongst other things, we're talking about very talented people who are also very humble and who look at things in a different way to get different outcomes. And that includes changing people's lives. So let's get right to it. I do want to introduce Gregory Rutledge. He is the UX designer that we are going to be focusing on his story today. We also have Chrissy Andrews here again. I want to mention thank you to Vitamin T and Aquent for continually elevating quality in the personnel that you hire and retain. And Dennis Covington is the hiring manager. And it looks like we're adding people to our call very quickly. So as your questions come in, we'll be sure to get to them. Let's get right to it. Gregory.
Yes.
You and I met online on LinkedIn after you posted a scathing remark about recruiters and not just staffing industry recruiters, but recruiters in-house as well, that all of them were pretty much of no help. And then you and I got talking and I said, whoa, wait a minute there. Let's just think about where things happened. But it's your story before that I want to hear. Where were you before you and I spoke and you met Chrissy? Where was your life?
So, where to start? There's a lot to this story, but I had accepted a job as a barista supervisor a few years back, and that brought me to the tech industry. So I was working at a software company named RealPage, and through the experiences that I was creating at what they called the Boost Bar, their Starbucks inside of their company, I got noticed and brought on as an account manager. And I was there for a little while, and it was a great big fail for me. My pride got in the way, and I fell pretty fast. So restaurant after restaurant, Michael's, there was a lot of jobs that I tried out some different things, and I decided that IHOP around the corner and going back to serving was the thing to do, because I know I'm good at that and I can control my income based on my service that I give. And when you know that your income depends on the user experience that you create great experiences. So I was at IHOP for about 2 weeks before the area manager approached me and asked me if I wanted to be a corporate trainer. And I was just blown away. I was like, I don't know what I did here, but I got the job actually by going up there to do some freelance work in their little back room because I love the music they play at IHOP. And they recognized me as the guy that analyzed their restaurant on Christmas Eve. So they offered me a job, and I took it as a joke. I was just going to do like 2 or 3 days a week, and I was working at another restaurant at the time, and it just kind of made this transition. I didn't know there was that much money at IHOP. So that's where I was before I met you. And you're right, I did post a pretty scathing review of recruiters, but I found that being my authentic self on LinkedIn was getting me more attention than trying to fit into a box that I don't fit in. And so when I was honest, it went viral. And that's when you met me or reached out, and I was educated on what goes on behind the scenes and what the Net Promoter Score is for most recruiting companies and what y'all's was. And you introduced me to Chrissy at Aquient and Vitamin T and George, both amazing. And I felt treated like a person for once. They got to know who I was. They put me in an interview with someone that had 15 years experience so that they can screen me as well and find out where exactly I would fit, so that when the fit was made, it was right. And it wasn't just forced so that they could get commission or whatever. So that's where I was at before.
We're not paying you to say that, right? Chrissy is not paying you to say any of this. And I think that's important to say. Nobody's getting anything out of this. So,
I mean, this is just me being real. It's been an awesome experience.
Thank you.
So before we get into Chrissy and Dennis, I want to understand, you have some natural abilities. You have what we call your essential self really came out. This is what you were born to do. You are an illustrator. You're an artist. You're a designer in your own right. And so what led you to user experience?
A peanut butter jelly sandwich, an open mind, and a lot of research. So I was on a performance improvement plan, which I had no idea what those were. I didn't know it was a warning to go look for another job. And you can't survive it no matter what. So I'm on a PIP and I'm at my desk. I'm trying to follow all these rules that I thought I was following anyway. And it just seemed like I was fighting a losing battle. So I said, screw this. I'm going to go make me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich because I'm going to lose my job anyway. And I went and made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and that's when I met Ty Griffin, the director of UX at RealPage. He recognized me from the Boost Bar, and he asked me how I was doing, told me, we had a talk. I haven't seen you at the Boost Bar. Where are you now? I told him all that story about how I transitioned, and he's like, how would you like to make $100,000 a year? And I'm so used to being approached for multi-level marketing that I just told him, I said, no, I'm good. And I walked away. And he stood there for a long time afterwards. And I turned around. I'm like, oh, he's still here. He might have something real. So I was like, okay, what kind of Ponzi scheme you got for me? What's the pyramid? And he's like, no, man, it's UX design. And I was like, okay, I'm listening. And he handed me a card and told me to do my research. So I did. And I was like, so people get paid to tell people how to make a better experience? Like, I could be getting paid for this? This could be something I do? And so he told me that he was opening up a school across the street for to give back to the community and teach people how to use their innovation, their natural gift of innovation, and that he was going to cut out all the fluff that they put on the school and just give us to it raw, like we're in the field already. And I went ahead and made the investment. I paid the whole thing up front, and I went, and then right around the time I started, I lost the job in Richardson. So here I am making this 90-mile round trip to the school and working at Michael's in Irving. So I was never home the 6 months I was in the school. And when I was home, I wasn't here because I was doing research to find out ways to get better at this, because I have the skill, but I don't know what I'm doing. And I did some research, and I found out that there was like 5 or 6 things that you had to do if you were transitioning. It was go to meetups, make connections in the community, continue to put your resume out there, apply, just build connections. And so I did that. And
who told you to do that, Gregory? Who told you that you had to be networking and getting on social media and doing all these things? Did you get coaching about that?
So I did a little research online on the best way to break in, and I kept getting this consistent from recruiters that were actually spending some time but just didn't have the roles for juniors. They would tell me, you're doing all the right things, just continue to put yourself out there, make connections, go to meetups, do freelance work, do volunteer work. So there was a little coaching before, but it wasn't as clear as when I met y'all. and I got backstory and educated and placed with someone that was in the field, and really, I felt valued. Like, they really care to put me in a place where I will be of use to the company. And since working with Dennis, I've had a lot of bad experiences with management and toxic environments. And I got to say that working with Dennis is one of the best things I've had since 2006, when I was working at Cheddar's, and I had 3 male managers that reminded me of dads. And they all kind of tag teamed on helping me improve. And Dennis does this in a different way. He, I don't know, he believes in me. He helps encourage me when it comes to what I'm doing, and he acknowledges the work that I'm doing, and continues to encourage ways to foster my creativity. And he's very humble, understanding. And I don't think I've ever had management quite like this. And I'm really grateful that this is where I landed. It almost feels too good to be true.
Okay, that did it. All right. Things are going to get emotional around here. So, Chrissy, then you come in. You, how did you find Gregory? Did he find you, or did you find him?
So I actually knew of Gregory. Gregory, you might not even know this, but I'm on LinkedIn all day long. And so Gregory is super networked. He was very active on social media. And so I kind of already knew who you were before we even spoke. And I believe you spoke to one of my colleagues, George, who eventually said, you need to talk to this guy. So that's really how we got connected. But yeah, I recognized his picture and name from LinkedIn.
Nice. And so you reached out to him then, is that right? Did you reach out to him initially to make that initial introduction? And so this is really interesting. This is really interesting because so many people don't realize how important LinkedIn is and that networking online is. So great insight there. So how did you reach out to him? Did you call him? Did you email him? Did you get him through LinkedIn?
Yeah. So even to kind of rewind a little bit more. So Gregory had first had an initial conversation with one of my colleagues where we put them through the traditional, interview of what's your background, what are your job preferences, and then we obviously take a step further at Vitamin T, where we get our talent on an expert interview, where Gregory actually spoke to a senior UX designer who's been about probably 45 minutes or an hour talking to you about what it is you like about UX and what your long-term goals are. And it's not because we can't have those conversations, but at the end of the day, I'm not a UX expert. If I was, hopefully I'd be working with Gregory and Den at the Container Store. But we really like to take that extra step so that we are putting Gregory in a position where it's going to match his short-term, long-term goals, where he's going to be set up to be successful. We never want to put someone in a position where they're overwhelmed or they can't handle the work. So we really wanted to understand Gregory's experience and capabilities and make sure that if we were recommending him to Dennis and the Container Store, that it would be a good match, not just, the soft skills, but the hard skills as well. So after Gregory had gone through our whole interview process, that's when George said, hey, reach out to Gregory if you have anything. And I just happen to have this perfect job with Dennis waiting for him. So
isn't that
really good timing? It's really good timing.
So it's interesting, though, with Brian Sullivan. Well, first of all, Brian Sullivan, if you guys don't know Brian Sullivan, connect with him. He is the founder of Big Design, which is a huge UX conference in Dallas. And I spoke there, I think, the first year that it happened. So Brian's saying that networking is a contact sport. It sure is. And before I forget, I am going to butcher this name, but I'm going to do my very best. Let me get my glasses on. Shashinkan Akula. She is giving Gregory's all kinds of thumbs up, and Matthew Feldman just says some of his favorite people are on this call. So But Gregory did not come to us with a lot of experience. What was that job description calling for, and how did you represent somebody with such a junior level capability?
Well, that goes to Dennis, who was really willing to be a mentor and bring someone in and take that time to mentor and train someone. Not everybody is willing or able to do that. But in my conversation that I had with Dennis, I think that was one thing, Dennis, you really touched on a lot about. That's the part of your job you enjoyed the most, is getting to mentor people, because not all of us are so lucky to have that person at the beginning of our career. And so I knew that the person that I found for Dennis needed to be someone that would appreciate that, to really appreciate the time that Dennis was going to take, that extra, time to really mentor. And so when I spoke to Gregory, I had talked to so many candidates before I ended up talking to Gregory, and I think I knew within like the first 5 or 10 minutes, I could hear the passion in Gregory's voice, and I could hear how much he wanted someone like Dennis to work with. And so as a recruiter, you kind of know, you talk to so many candidates all day long, and then you finally get that one, you're like, this is it. And so I really felt that with Gregory, because I was like, this is going to be a really good cultural fit. I feel like they both are going to really line up, with what Gregory needs in a career, what Dennis is willing to do as a manager. So it's just I love when that happens as a recruiter.
Yeah. And it happens. It happens really a lot more than we realize that it does, right? Because that right person, when you meet them, it just happens like any relationship. So now, how did you get the opportunity with Dennis? Did Dennis already have an idea of what he wanted in a candidate, or did you help him shape that a little bit based on what you know about UX and other factors?
Yeah, so we had Vitamin T had worked with Container Store over the years, and Denise, you were fairly new to the organization. I believe we had first started working together, and so I knew that you guys are kind of in the process of trying to build a UX team, and so I think there was a little bit of a kind of discovery phase where Dennis and I talked about kind of what does this person look like, what is this role going to be, but I don't know. Dennis made my job really, really easy because I don't know. He just made it really easy. I wish I could say that I did all this really hard work for this to come together, but Dennis really kind of knew what he was looking for. So when I sent portfolios over, he's like, "This is the design style I'm looking for," and again, he was just so willing and open to train and mentor someone. So yeah, it made my job really easy.
And so one more question for you, Christy, before I move on to Dennis. So Christy, you had Gregory go through the expert interview. Did that expert interviewer come back and say, what did he say, or she? What did they say that gave you the inclination that he was ready to step into even a junior role?
Yeah, well, they looked at all of his skills within UX, and kind of I shared the job description with our UX expert, and they basically said, yeah, Gregory, I feel like could totally handle what Container Store is asking for. But really, this is not at all to discredit Gregory's amazing skills, because he did come out of school with an awesome portfolio. He wouldn't have even gotten in front of Dennis if it wasn't for his portfolio. But it was really his attitude and his personality that, not just for myself, but even for our expert interviewer, was like, I would trust to put this guy in front of anybody, because our talent are a representation of our company, they're a representation of myself as a recruiter, and sometimes the skills you can learn on the job if you have that right attitude, and you are willing to work hard. That goes more sometimes than the skills, so I think that was the thing that the expert interviewer and myself really saw in Gregory, that he's got the right attitude and drive, that we felt like whatever we put him in, he would figure it out and get there. So
yeah. And so Brian Sullivan is also chiming in again. He says, as a hiring manager, some of the best hires were people that I hired for potential and fit. And he also said, Chrissy, that you're underselling yourself, so work on that. I think you two are fans of one another. Well, who wouldn't be, right? So, all right, Dennis, you're on here. So you are the reason, right, that that your need, your requirement was the reason that Gregory has this opportunity available to him, right? So how did you craft this? This is a small UX team within the side of the organization, correct? If I understand correctly?
Yeah, they're really, it's a growing UX team. We had some UX designers, some digital designers prior to my hiring, but my position didn't exist prior to me coming on. And one of the reasons why they didn't just go kind of with a senior level UX designer and they wanted a manager role was because they knew they needed a process. They knew they needed a team to really make some changes that the Container Store is striving to do internally. So we had at the time when I brought in, there was one other contractor who was great, and I kind of saw her as the beginning of my team, and then she, fortunately for her and unfortunately for me, she went on to kind of further grow in her career and leave us at the time. So then I was kind of a team of one at that point. So I knew my first hire and the first person I brought on to be part of that team. I just knew I needed somebody really, really special.
That's interesting because if it's a small team, and this is the question that a lot of newcomers to UX are asking, is more often than not, they are coming across competition that is more experienced than they are. And so they're losing opportunities because of their lack of experience. But even with a small team, Dennis, you decided that having somebody with that potential is more important than bringing somebody in with a high level of experience. Why? Why did you go that route?
Well, I think in Brian's comment, he hired for potential and fit, and that's very much one area that my mind was at in coming in. I was helping to design and implement a new UX process that our company didn't have, and I didn't necessarily want somebody who was so experienced and was used to working a certain way in a certain process that they weren't going to be happy in the process that I was kind of trying to design and implement. So finding somebody that I thought had that, I think, drive and passion has been mentioned in terms of Gregory several times already in our discussion here. But finding somebody who had that kind of energy, but not necessarily was going to be so set in, this is UX process, this is the way it's supposed to be done, was important to me. So finding somebody, again, that I could kind of help mentor and mold into doing great work, but I didn't want them so locked into one way of working that they weren't going to be happy.
Got it. I want to go back to talking about Gregory's portfolio and how he presented himself. This is another area, and I'm sure you see this online all day long about what should be in your portfolio, what should it look like, blah, 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 blah. We're also hearing horror stories about boot camps, right? About not getting placed, and the curriculum is not where it should be. And so we've got both of that happening right here in this call. So let's start with that portfolio, because that portfolio is an artifact of his training, of Gregory's training. So what did you see, Chrissy, in his portfolio that impressed you enough to pass it off to Dennis? What was that?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I've been looking at portfolios for 14 years now. So, they all start to just kind of blur together. And then, you see when you're like, this is awesome. So I was really, really just impressed. I mean, he obviously had some beautiful visuals, but I remember that Gregory showed his process. And that's something that I think a lot of designers aren't doing. And especially, for UXers, your portfolio should be really easy to navigate. You should have a good experience for the person going through your portfolio. And oftentimes I see UX portfolios that are not a good experience for a recruiter to look at. And I was just really impressed, for being a junior candidate, how clean his portfolio was, but also just he showed his process. And I didn't have to guess, what did you do? What was your role? What was the project you were doing? There wasn't a lot of guesswork. So that was the thing that I really, really remember liking about Gregory's portfolio.
Awesome. Gregory, where did you get help on your portfolio?
Wow. That is a loaded question. So I reached out to a couple people on LinkedIn before I even knew who they were. Brian Sullivan was one of them.
Oh,
He led me to one of his sites that had some stuff on it, and Seda Maurer, who's the accessibility program manager at Sabre, I had a really great couple talks with her before I really got out there on meetups and stuff, and found that accessibility was key at the ground level, and that anything else that's built on top of that will succeed. And I did a lot of research on Medium articles. I looked at what not to do on Behance and Dribble because there's a lot of beautiful visuals, but horrible functionality when it comes to that on those pages. And then I just took and boiled down everything that didn't work and extracted what would work from it. And the successful portfolios that I saw were clean, simple. They had that Apple feel to them. So that's what I went for, was clean and simple. And Dennis knows this. The process of keeping things simple is actually a lot more complicated than it seems.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you. So I think that brings home a number of points for anyone who is looking to get into this space on how to build a portfolio. Dennis, what caught your eye about that portfolio, about Dennis, or about Gregory's portfolio?
Well, yeah. So I think anybody that's going through this process, and you've got several resumes and portfolios in front of you, it's easy to kind of go, resume blind when it's just they all look identical, and there's none that really jump out at you. So I think Gregory's visual style and presentation was something that instantly made me kind of set that over to the side so that I could go back to it and really focus on it. In comparison with some of the others that I had seen. Two, and Chrissy mentioned this, he spoke to his process in the experience that he was presenting. And I was in the midst of developing a process. So I had certain touch points in my mind that I had been kind of living with. And so to have those jump out at me in that portfolio, that here's somebody that I can speak to about this, here's somebody that's going to understand what I'm trying to do, because obviously they have experience with it. That was really important to me. So that was what kind of made it, when I set that resume onto my stack of, I definitely want to go back to these. That's what made me bring that one and put it on top of the stack. And then constantly kind of started comparing the others to it as I was kind of, narrowing down my candidate list. So yeah, the presentation it's important, especially in this industry. You have to have a certain, you can say visual style more from a UI design standpoint, but from a UX standpoint, it was organized very well. And then just the content spoke to what I myself was actually looking for. And that ultimately was what made me, tell Chrissy and her team, like, yeah, definitely, let's get this guy on the phone.
So you had not spoken with Gregory or to any degree other than his portfolio. His portfolio gave you the green light to say, Chrissy, let's go ahead and schedule a time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that was kind of the process, was portfolios are good representation, not only of a candidate's experience, but I think also what work they can do and how they're going to go about doing it. And so to be able to look at those ahead of time, obviously, and kind of say, okay, this person I think looks good. This person looks good. They don't always come, the portfolio isn't always a great representation of the candidate once you do get them on the phone, which, is I think probably a common experience a lot of people in my position have had. But that wasn't necessarily the case with Gregory. He's got a lot of personality. His portfolio had a lot of personality. It did not misrepresent him at all. And I think that's important to have that first thing that's going to kind of get you onto the next step, to not have it just look good. You don't want to copy somebody else's and say, wow, this looks really good and I want to be like that person. Your portfolio really needs to be a representation of who you are, so that when you're speaking to it, it's clear that this is that candidate. It's not that this is the candidate that copied someone else's work, and they're having a hard time talking to all these bullet points and all the information that they've put in their portfolio.
So it sounds like you're looking for authenticity in the portfolio.
That's a great way to put it. I probably just should have said that, but
well, you're really looking to find out you're looking for that portfolio is an extension of who that individual is and how they think, right? Not only what they do, but who they are and what they think. So so that's interesting. So I want to talk to you about both you and Chrissy specifically about the hybrid, the homogenization of what's happening in UX. Some of it is happening for economic reasons. Some of it is happening, a lot of it is happening for economic reasons, where one person is expected to do so many things under the UX umbrella. So here you've got somebody, it's been my experience, and I've been in this domain for quite some time, that UX, you either come into it from the IT area, you come in through the creative area, and some people go through the psychological area, right, where the heavy on the UX research and testing. So Dennis, how are you looking at all of these facets under the UX umbrella, and where do you see Greg really fine-tuning his capabilities under that UX umbrella? And are you looking at more of creating hybrid people in this space, or are you ever going to be looking for very specific research and testing? How does that look for you?
Yeah, I came to this position from the advertising industry for many years, so kind of doing work at various advertising agencies, and there's a very definite split between UX and visual design, and so now coming and working for in this e-commerce and design tools company where I'm at now, I do find a need really for it's hybrid person. Makes it seem so weird, like at a horror movie. But having somebody with those two skill sets, where I'm very much a user experience, information architecture kind of guy in my history, not a trained visual designer at all, although I can hold my own up to a very small point. Because of that, I did need somebody coming in that had a strong passion for UI and visual design. But I also, because it was going to be one person helping me out on quite a range of projects, I did need somebody who I knew I could also hand off UX work to, and to be able to separate. And this is something I'm working on with Gregory, between not designing too hard in the UX phase, but really kind of following that user experience process. And then when we do go into design, that's when you really kind of let those creative juices flow. And it's not a definite line at all. Certainly in all my UX documentation, I'm suggesting some design a little bit, and so you can kind of get it up to a certain point. But because of that, and hopefully I'm speaking to your question, to have both of those skill sets and knowing when to shift a gear from user experience into more UI design, I think it's important, and knowing when to focus on each of those verticals is also important. I think I said the same thing 3 times through there, so hopefully I stuck the landing at least once.
I think what I'm hearing is that, in a sense, you understand the function of UX in its whole part, which is the research and the testing, and what drives that design and that product solution, right? And where that creative UI or visual element fits within the process. So talk to me about user experience, and this is really interesting. Gregory was filling me in that user experience wasn't always top of mind inside the Container Store. So, and recent events may have elevated your team's value and contributions within the organization. Can you shed some light on that for us?
Yeah, it depends on which projects you're kind of working on. With our we make not only do we have our website, which is our big e-commerce engine and effort, we also are the UX team for our design tools, which our in-store and virtual and home designers use to essentially design custom closets, among other things. And then there's a online version of that design tool as well. On that design tools team, they work very agile. It's very quick. Oftentimes they need somebody that can kind of Nandi just joined on. She was somebody I was referring to earlier that was on the team. Hi, Nandi. They needed really somebody that could give insight into some UX principle and then provide that interface very quickly. On the website, it was a slightly different manner. They needed more UX strategy. They needed more of a UX process. I'll call Nandi out again. I came in as she was working on a rather large scale project. And it was heartbreaking to me to see her at a phase when she's gone through all this UX and design efforts, and she's presenting it to our developers and our stakeholders, and they just start coming up with new requirements. Oh, well, this has to have this, and we have to have this, and we forgot to tell you to do this, over and over and over again. And I could just see her, getting ground down more and more, in every meeting. And it was just, it couldn't have been a fulfilling place to work. It has to be very just difficult to be professionally in that kind of situation where you weren't set up to succeed. Now, here we are in the age of COVID, where our e-commerce focus has become so important within our company. We have to close stores. We have to go to curbside pickup, by appointment ordering. People can't go into our physical locations anymore to buy their closets, to buy their storage needs, to buy things for their kitchen and bath. And so a huge amount of internal focus within our company was focusing on the web team. And suddenly our priorities changed of what types of projects we were focusing on, but it had to be a smart development, and because there was so much riding on it, and we couldn't kind of make the mistakes of the past of we forgot that we have to include all this. We had to have then that process. We were having requirements discussions, and not moving on to the next phase until we got a listing of everything each of our individual projects had to entail before we went on to UX development, and certainly before we went on to design. And that was even having requirements and doing requirements documentation was fairly new in our company. But when you sit down and you're talking to our high-level developers and saying, okay, well, we've put this document together to help you when you're writing your development stories. And they've really taken to it. They're like, why haven't we been doing this all along? And it's such a basic thing. I think probably for a lot of people on the call that, requirements are fantastic. There's a reason why you do it as part of your discovery process. So you're not doing your UX design in the dark, and you're certainly not, like Nandi was doing, essentially doing visual design in the dark. And it's the way we've been moving forward. So I had hoped to have a big presentation internally with, here's my new suggested UX development process where we have our phases. But it just kind of became a trial by fire where there was no time for that. It was, let's just start with this next project, and we're going to keep doing it as we move forward.
Okay, that's great. I want to take one step back from how you got to that requirement stage, right? Introducing these are the requirements, and let's think about user experience in the whole sense, not just in a partial sense. So you've got Gregory, a team of one, and Nandi. Yes, hello, Nandi. She's actually going to be on a live call with me in a week. And Brian, I've got in another week after that. So yes, Nandi, we are all together. I do want to stop and recognize what Jennifer Flores is saying. She said, inspirational and gives me hope. Thank you for sharing your story, Gregory. Also, hi, Brian. I was lucky enough to be able to attend his SMU program, and his portion is what clicked for me and made me feel like I was born to do this. So, Brian, your live broadcast can't come soon enough. So Dennis, you know how to do that. You intuitively and through your experience, you know how to get a company to think or to change their thought process and how to develop products, digital products, right? How do you coach somebody like Gregory? How do you express that to Chrissy and say, we're launching this? This is a hole within our organization, and this is how I'm going to close that gap, how I'm going to close that hole. How do you do that with Gregory?
It's well, and I with Gregory especially, I had the benefit of kind of having a documentation of my thought process and describing what needs to happen in stakeholder interviews, and then how that then informs the requirements documentation, and how that then informs our UX documentation, or the next step in from a UX process, what we wanted to do, then how that informs the designs, and then all of it helps inform our developers in kind of knowing what the end project needs to be. With Gregory, a lot of it was, and I as a manager, I don't want to be somebody that junior level is my assistant at all. To me, it's so much more important to get them to a point where they can do the work themselves, and then you kind of help guide as they go along. For something like a stakeholder interview or stakeholder multiple interviews in going into requirements, that does take a little bit of observation to just see how somebody works, how they do conduct those interviews, and then what they do with it, how you kind of draw out the information. That's just kind of a skill set that happens. So from that, I think demonstratively teaching is the best way to approach it. And then what you do with it is more of a, let's work together on this, and you get more of a kind of back and forth type of teaching and coaching as you go. And then it gets to a point where I knew Gregory had the skills and the ability that you can hand that off to him and say, okay, let's work with this. Let's get together repeatedly, kind of talk through whatever issues before presenting it to anybody internally. So it just becomes our own little back and forth process that nobody else really needs to know about, but it helps us as a team work better together.
And so at that point, what I'm hearing you say, there's a lot of preparation that goes on behind the scene between you and the individual, between you and Gregory. And then at some point, when you're confident that Gregory can articulate the process and the things that need to happen in that discussion and how to handle them, then Gregory can go in on his own with you as the wingman. So is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and it's already happened several times, I think, and it's honestly, I think internally it's a Container Store. They would rather Gregory present than me. They're just a little more fun. That's maybe something I need to learn from him a bit more. But yeah, he's definitely finding his own style. I think his confidence that he was maybe tamping down a little bit through uncertainty and just being new in this position. And certainly, this is not the ideal environment where when you're meeting team members for the first time in these little windows. So to have to kind of find your way and maybe re-hone that confidence a little bit, to see that happen with Gregory, especially here recently, just to see this light come on with him, like he flicked a switch, and that presentation style when he just nailed it, it was really fulfilling. It was fun for me really to watch, and I think maybe I said one or two words in that entire meeting and just kind of let him run with it, and we followed up together after.
So yeah, what I'm hearing here is that, Dennis, you value the communication style and the skills, and it sounds like Gregory's very flexible. He's also a bit, even though he might be a little self-conscious and concerned, he's also willing to give it a try. Sounds like he's been pretty fearless in all of this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. He's got style. That comes naturally, right? Believe it or not, our time is up.
Oh, wow. You were right.
It goes very, very fast. And so I want any closing remarks from you guys on what is your best advice to a junior UX designer in moving forward in their career. Chrissy, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, and this is not just for UX design. I would say this really to anybody right now looking for a job. I mean, whether you've just been laid off, furloughed, you're struggling, this is just a very small part of your much bigger employment story. So please don't let this time right now that you might be struggling define you and your abilities. Again, it's just a very small little blip. But just, I know it's cliche, all about who you know, but really it's about who you know. So just network. Brian Sullivan is awesome person to network here. Gregory, shoot him a note, connected him. Dennis, I mean, again, I knew who Gregory was before I even talked to him because I saw him all over my LinkedIn feed. And so when someone mentioned his name, I was like, I know who that is. So be active on LinkedIn and network. That's probably my biggest advice I can give you. Find a mentor like Dennis or Brian.
Excellent. Dennis, what's your advice?
I think you are your own best asset, and figure out how to present yourself in the way that you want to be perceived, that speaks to your natural skills as well as industry skills together. Let your resume and your portfolio be equal parts, both of those, because you'll stand out and you'll be more confident in that presentation that this is me on paper or on screen. And so when that person brings you in to actually meet you, they get, yeah, this is what I saw in this resume, and this is now this person that I'm on the phone with. So have it be true to yourself and not just a carbon copy of something that you've seen online.
Wow. And Gregory, what is your advice?
So my advice to juniors is, like Dennis said, you are your best asset. So be yourself, your authentic self. You're not going to be able to keep up the representative that you try to put on when you get in these interviews. So it's best to just be yourself, because if you get rejected, then when you finally are accepted, you're accepted for who you are and you don't have to work as hard.
Wow.
I can't stress enough how important it is for your LinkedIn, your resume, and your portfolio to line up and have that integrity. An integer is a whole number, so you have to be an integer, and the whole thing has to come together as a whole to show your process, why you do what you do, and who you are. And it's really hard to speak to yourself I don't fit in a box. So it's hard to express the personality, but it's worth the effort to try. So I would say, I would close with this. Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness is how we do this. And being who you truly are, and networking. Networking is very important. Brian Sullivan has been a really good mentor for me. Me and Nandi were taught by the same people. And so our design style was very, very similar. And like Chrissy said, I became the LinkedIn guy. When people saw me at meetups, they were like, hey, it's the LinkedIn guy. I was all over LinkedIn.
Nice.
I just shifted my focus from Facebook to LinkedIn, and it worked.
Well, thank you all very, very much for giving Gregory the opportunity, for being willing to help somebody new in the UX community, because that is our practice's future. And thank you all for joining. I really appreciate it. At 2:00 Eastern time today, we are actually going to make an Akatame website reveal with the designer, the developer, the UX person who are responsible for the new look and feel and branding of Akatame itself. And again, thank you all. Have a great day, and we'll see you hopefully in a couple of hours. If the team here on the broadcast could hang out for just a second while I end the broadcast. Have a great day, everybody.